It was the kind of Tuesday evening that made you forget about everything that went wrong during the day. The sky had turned that soft orange color that only shows up for a few minutes before the sun disappears completely. The air coming through the car window was warm but not too hot. It was the perfect temperature for driving with the windows down. Denise Williams had her left elbow resting on the doorframe. Her fingers tapped lightly against the steering wheel as an old song played quietly on the radio. She was tired. The good kind of tired that comes after a long day of hard work. The kind of tired that makes your bed feel like the most wonderful place in the entire world. She had been at work since 6:30 that morning. As the principal of a middle school in Atlanta, her days started early and ended late. Today had been especially long. Parent-teacher conferences always were. She had spent nearly 11 hours listening to worried mothers and frustrated fathers. Some wanted to know why their children were struggling with math. Others wanted to talk about friendship problems and bullying. A few just needed someone to tell them they were doing a good job raising their kids. Denise loved these conversations even when they were difficult. She had been an educator for almost 30 years now. She started as a young teacher fresh out of college with big dreams and a heart full of hope. Over the decades, she had worked her way up. Teacher, department head, vice principal. And finally, 7 years ago, principal. She had seen thousands of students come and go. She remembered so many of their faces. The shy ones who bloomed into confident young people. The troublemakers who just needed someone to believe in them. The quiet kids who surprised everyone with their hidden talents. Every single one of them had taught her something about life and about herself. Tonight she was thinking about a conversation she had with a mother earlier in the day. The woman had been nervous. Her son was failing 2 classes and she was terrified he would have to repeat the grade. She had tears in her eyes when she sat down across from Denise, but by the end of their meeting, the mother was smiling. Denise had explained that her son was actually very bright. He just learned differently than most kids. With some extra help and a few changes to his study habits, he could turn things around completely. The relief on that mother's face had been worth every minute of the long day. That was why Denise did this job. Not for the salary, which was decent but nothing special. Not for the recognition, which came rarely if ever. She did it for moments like that. For the chance to change the direction of a young person's life. For the opportunity to give families hope when they were running low. She turned onto Maple Street and felt her shoulders relax even more. She was almost home now. Just 3 more blocks and she would be pulling into her driveway. Her house was nothing fancy. A modest brick home with a small front yard and a garden she never had enough time to properly tend to. But it was hers. She had bought it 15 years ago after her divorce. It was the place where she had rebuilt her life one small piece at a time. Her son had grown up in that house. He was 26 now and living in Chicago working as an accountant. She missed him terribly, but she was proud of the man he had become. They talked on the phone every Sunday evening without fail. He always asked about her students. He always remembered their stories. He had inherited her heart for young people. Denise was thinking about calling him tonight. Maybe she would tell him about the mother she had helped today. He would like that story. He always said she didn't take enough credit for the good she did in the world. That was when she noticed the flashing lights. At first, she thought it was an ambulance. Maybe there had been an accident up ahead. Or perhaps someone in the neighborhood had a medical emergency. She felt a small pang of worry. She knew most of her neighbors by name. Mrs. Patterson was getting older and had trouble with her hip. The family 2 doors down had a new baby who had been born premature, but then the lights got closer and she realized they were behind her. Not ahead, behind. She looked in her rearview mirror and saw a police car. Its red and blue lights were spinning fast and bright against the darkening sky. There was no siren, just the lights, but the message was clear. Pull over. Denise felt a small flutter of confusion in her chest. She wasn't speeding. She was certain of that. Her Honda was old and reliable, but not exactly built for racing. She had been driving maybe 30 miles per hour through the residential streets. Well, under the limit, maybe one of her taillights was out. That happened sometimes with older cars. Or maybe she had accidentally forgotten to use her turn signal at one of the intersections. That would be embarrassing, but not a big deal. She pulled over to the side of the street and put her car in park. Her movements were slow and deliberate. She rolled down her window all the way and then placed both hands on top of the steering wheel, where they could be clearly seen. This was not the first time she had been pulled over in her life. It had happened perhaps 4 or 5 times over the years, usually for minor things: a rolling stop at a stop sign, driving a few miles over the speed limit on the highway, once for having an expired registration that she had simply forgotten to renew. Each time she had done exactly what she was doing now. Hands on the wheel, window down, respectful and calm. Her father had taught her this when she was just 16 years old. He had been a police officer himself for 32 years before he retired. He knew better than anyone how traffic stops could go wrong. He knew that the first few seconds mattered more than anything else. Make yourself small, he used to tell her. Show them you are not a threat. Speak clearly and politely. Never reach for anything unless they ask you to. And even then, move slowly and tell them exactly what you are doing. She had passed these same lessons on to her own son when he got his license. The conversation had broken her heart a little. No mother should have to teach her child how to survive a simple traffic stop. But she was a practical woman. She dealt with the world as it was not as she wished it could be. She waited for the officer to approach her window. The seconds felt longer than they should have. She could hear her own breathing and the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere down the street. A sprinkler was running in someone's front yard. The last bits of sunlight were fading from the sky. Then she heard car doors opening. Not one door. Multiple doors. She looked in her side mirror and felt something cold run down her spine. There were 2 police cars now. She had not noticed the second one arrive. 4 officers were getting out of their vehicles. And something about the way they were moving made her stomach tighten. They were not walking toward her car the way officers usually do during a routine stop. They were approaching with their bodies low and their hands near their hips. Their faces were hard and serious. There was tension in every step they took. Denise kept her hands on the steering wheel. She did not move. She barely breathed. She had no way of knowing what had happened 20 minutes earlier, just 2 miles from where she now sat. She did not know that a woman had walked into a convenience store with a weapon hidden in her jacket. She did not know that this woman had threatened the clerk and demanded money from the register before fleeing in a dark-colored car. She did not know that the description given to police was frustratingly vague. Black female, somewhere between 35 and 50 years old. Driving a dark sedan. Denise Williams was 45. She was black, and she was driving a navy blue Honda Accord. In the eyes of these officers, she matched the description. In their minds, she could be dangerous. She could be armed. She could be the person who had just terrorized an innocent store clerk. They had no idea they were approaching a woman who had dedicated her entire life to helping children. They did not know about the 30 years of service or the thousands of students she had guided toward better futures. They did not know about the mother she had comforted just hours ago, or the son in Chicago who would be expecting her phone call on Sunday. All they saw was a suspect, and what happened next would change everything. The first thing Denise noticed was the sound. It was a clicking noise, sharp and metallic. The kind of sound that cuts through everything else and demands your attention. She knew what it was even before she looked. She had heard that sound in movies and on television 100 times. But hearing it in real life was something else entirely. It was the sound of weapons being drawn. She turned her head very slowly. Just a few inches. Just enough to see what was happening outside her window. And what she saw made her heart stop beating for just a moment. 3 officers had their firearms pointed directly at her car. Their arms were extended and locked. Their eyes were focused and intense. Behind them, the 4th officer was speaking into his radio. His voice was low and urgent, but she could not make out the words. Everything felt unreal, like she had somehow stepped into someone else's nightmare. This could not be happening. Not here on Maple Street. Not 3 blocks from her home. Not to her. Then the shouting began. Get out of the vehicle. One officer yelled the words so loud that they seemed to echo off the houses lining the street. His voice was sharp with authority and something else. Something that sounded almost like fear. Show us your hands. Get out now. Denise could feel her pulse pounding in her temples. Her mouth went dry. Her hands were already on the steering wheel, but suddenly she became aware of every single finger. Were they visible enough? Could the officers see them clearly in the fading light? What if they thought she was reaching for something? She did not move. She could not move. Her body seemed frozen in place, like someone had poured concrete into her bones. Ma'am, step out of the vehicle with your hands up. Do it now. The commands kept coming, one after another, each one louder and more urgent than the last. The officers' voices overlapped and blended together, until it became almost impossible to understand what they wanted her to do. Get out. Hands up. Step away from the car. Do not move. Show us your hands. How was she supposed to follow all of these instructions at once? How could she get out of the car without moving? How could she step away while keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel? Her mind was racing, but her training kicked in. 30 years of working with children in crisis had taught her something important. When emotions run high and fear takes over, the worst thing you can do is react without thinking. You have to stay calm even when everything inside you is screaming. She took a breath. It was shaky, but it was a breath, officers. She spoke the word loudly and clearly. Her voice did not sound like her own. It sounded distant and strange, like it belonged to someone else. Officers, I am going to do exactly what you say. I am not a threat. I am going to move very slowly. One of the officers shouted again. Keep your hands where we can see them. My hands are on the steering wheel. Denise kept her voice as steady as she could. I am going to open my door with my left hand. I will keep my right hand raised. Is that okay? There was a pause. The officers exchanged quick glances with each other. One of them gave a small nod. Do it slow. Real slow. Denise moved like she was underwater. Every motion deliberate and exaggerated. She lifted her left hand from the wheel and held it in the air for a moment so they could see it was empty. Then she reached down and found the door handle. The metal was warm from the evening sun. The door swung open with a soft creak. The sound was so normal, so everyday, that it felt completely out of place in this terrifying moment. She stepped out of the car, with her hands raised above her head. The asphalt was still warm under her shoes. She could feel a slight breeze on her face. Somewhere nearby a bird was singing its evening song, completely unaware of the drama unfolding below. The officers did not lower their weapons. If anything, they seemed to grip them tighter. Their eyes never left her. She could see the tension in their shoulders and the tightness in their jaws. Turn around. Face the vehicle. Put your hands on the roof. She did as she was told. The metal of her car was warm against her palms. She stared at the navy blue paint and tried to control her breathing. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. The same technique she taught her students. When they were having panic attacks, she could hear footsteps approaching behind her. Heavy boots on pavement? Then a voice much closer now. Do you have any weapons on you? Any sharp objects? Anything that could hurt us? No. Denise shook her head slightly. No, I do not have any weapons. I am a school principal. I was driving home from work. The officer did not respond to this. She felt hands patting down her sides and her pockets. Professional, but thorough? Looking for anything that might be hidden? She is clean. The officer behind her called out to the others, but still the weapons stayed raised. Still, the tension hung thick in the air like fog on a winter morning. Denise became aware of something else now. Other sounds. Other voices. She turned her head just slightly and saw that people had come out of their houses. Her neighbors were standing on their porches and in their front yards. Watching everything unfold, she recognized several faces. The elderly woman who lived directly across the street was clutching her hands to her chest. Her eyes were wide with shock. The young couple from 2 houses down stood frozen on their lawn. The husband had his phone out. He was recording. More phones appeared. More cameras pointed in her direction. The red recording lights glowed like tiny warning signals in the growing darkness. One of the neighbors called out, "What is going on?" "What did she do?" An officer turned and shouted back. "Stay back, this is police business." Everyone needs to stay back, but the neighbors did not go inside. They stood their ground. They kept watching. They kept recording. Denise felt a strange mix of emotions wash over her. Embarrassment that her neighbors were seeing her like this. Gratitude that there were witnesses. Fear about what might happen next. And underneath it all, a deep and burning sense of injustice. She had done nothing wrong. She had not committed any crime. She had simply been driving home after a long day of helping children and comforting parents. And now she was standing with her hands pressed against her own car while armed officers treated her like a dangerous criminal. She thought about all the times she had seen stories like this on the news. All the times she had shaken her head and felt sad for the people involved. She had always wondered what she would do if she ever found herself in a situation like that. Would she be scared? Would she be angry? Would she cry? Now she knew the answer. She would be all of those things at once. But more than anything, she would be determined. Determined to survive this moment. Determined to make it home safely. Determined to handle this with the same dignity and grace she tried to bring to every difficult situation in her life. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions." One of the officers moved closer. His weapon was finally lowered, but his hand stayed near his hip. Ready to draw again at any moment. "A robbery was committed about 20 minutes ago. The suspect matches your description. We need to know where you have been tonight." Denise turned around slowly, keeping her hands where they could see them. She looked at the officer who had spoken. He was young, maybe late 20s. There was something in his eyes that she recognized. It was the same look she saw in students who had done something they were not sure about. A mixture of conviction and doubt. "I have been at my school." She spoke calmly and clearly. "Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School. I am the principal there. Tonight was parent-teacher conferences. I have been in my office and in meetings since 6:30 this morning. Hundreds of people saw me there today." The officer studied her face. He seemed to be processing this information, weighing it against whatever he had been told over his radio. "Do you have any identification? My purse is in the car, on the passenger seat. My wallet is inside." The officer nodded to one of his colleagues who approached the open car door and carefully retrieved her purse. He opened it and pulled out her wallet. Inside was her driver's license and right next to it her school identification badge. Her photo smiled out from the laminated card along with her name and title. The officer looked at the badge for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. The hardness began to soften just slightly, but Denise knew this was not over. Not yet, not by a long way. Because even as the officers began to realize they might have made a mistake, something inside her had already started to change. A decision was forming in her mind. A choice about how she would respond to this moment, and that choice would soon shock everyone watching. The officer was still holding her school identification badge. His eyes moved back and forth between the photo on the card and the woman standing in front of him. The doubt on his face was growing stronger with every second that passed. Around them, the neighborhood had come alive with witnesses. At least a dozen people now stood watching from their yards and porches. The red lights of cell phone cameras blinked in the darkness like fireflies. Everything was being recorded. Everything would be remembered. Denise could have stayed quiet. She could have waited for the officers to confirm her identity and send her on her way. She could have gone home and locked her door and tried to forget this terrible evening ever happened. That would have been the easy thing to do, the safe thing, but something was stirring inside her chest. A feeling she had known her entire adult life. It was the same feeling she got when she saw a child being treated unfairly on the playground. The same feeling that rose up when a student was judged for the color of their skin instead of the content of their character. It was a feeling that demanded action. She had spent 30 years teaching young people to speak up when something was wrong. She had told countless students that their voices mattered. that staying silent in the face of injustice only allowed injustice to continue. How could she go home tonight and look at herself in the mirror if she did not practice what she preached? So she made a choice that would be replayed millions of times in the days and weeks to come. She began to speak, officer. Her voice was calm, but it carried clearly through the evening air. Every neighbor could hear her. Every camera could capture her words. I understand that you were doing your job tonight. I understand that you received a description and that I happened to match it. I do not blame you for stopping me. The young officer looked surprised. This was not the reaction he had expected. Most people in this situation would be angry or defensive or demanding to speak with a lawyer. But this woman was speaking to him like he was one of her students. With patience and respect, Denise continued. But I need you to understand something too. I need you to see what just happened here from my side. She paused and looked around at the scene. The flashing lights, the officers with their hands still near their weapons, the neighbors recording everything on their phones, the warm evening that had turned into something cold and frightening. 20 minutes ago, I was sitting in my office at school. I was talking to a mother who was worried about her son. She had tears in her eyes because she thought he was going to fail. I spent an hour with her. I helped her understand that her boy is smart and capable and just needs a little extra support. When she left my office, she was smiling. She hugged me and said thank you. The officer shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He was listening. Before that, I met with a father who works 2 jobs to support his family. He came in during his lunch break because he could not get any other time off. He wanted to know if his daughter was making friends. He wanted to know if she seemed happy. He had tears in his eyes too, because he feels guilty that he cannot be home more often. I told him his daughter talks about him all the time. I told him she is proud of him. Denise took a small step forward, not threatening, just closing the distance enough to make the conversation feel more personal. I have been doing this work for 30 years. 30 years of waking up early and staying late. 30 years of helping children find their way in this world. 30 years of being someone that families trust with the most precious thing they have, their kids. She looked directly into the young officer's eyes, and tonight I was driving home from all of that. I was 3 blocks from my house. I was thinking about calling my son. He lives in Chicago now. He is an accountant. I am very proud of him. We talk every Sunday, and I was going to tell him about the mother I helped today. He loves hearing stories like that. Her voice remained steady, but there was emotion underneath it now. Real and raw and impossible to ignore. Then I saw your lights behind me, and I pulled over immediately, just like my father taught me. He was a police officer for 32 years. Did you know that? He spent his whole career serving this community. He taught me to respect the badge. He taught me to cooperate. He taught me to keep my hands visible and my voice calm. She held up her hands slightly. Showing that they were empty and harmless. I did everything right. Tonight. Everything. And I still ended up standing on the side of the road with guns pointed at my chest. I still ended up being patted down like a criminal in front of my neighbors. People I have known for 15 years. People whose children I have taught and mentored and loved. The elderly woman across the street had started to cry. She was wiping her eyes with a tissue. She had known Denise for over a decade. She had watched her leave for work every morning and return every evening. She knew what kind of person she was. Denise noticed her neighbor crying, but she kept her focus on the officers in front of her. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand something important. When you look at me, what do you see? Do you see a suspect? Do you see a threat? Do you see someone who matches a description? She took a breath before delivering the words that would echo across the internet for months to come. Or do you see a woman? A mother, a daughter, a teacher, a human being who has spent her entire life trying to make this world a little bit better than she found it. The younger officer lowered his eyes. He could not hold her gaze anymore. Something was happening inside him. Something was shifting. I am not asking you to apologize, Denise said softly. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm just asking you to see me. Really see me. Not as a description on a radio call, not as a profile that fits a pattern, but as a person, a whole complete person with a life and a history and people who love her. She gestured toward the neighbors, who were still watching and recording. These people know me. That woman over there. She pointed to the elderly neighbor with the tissue. I bring her groceries every Sunday because her hip makes it hard for her to walk. That couple over there. Their daughter was in my school 3 years ago. She was struggling with reading, and we worked with her every day after class until she caught up. Now she is on the honor roll. The officers exchanged glances with each other. The situation had shifted completely. This was no longer an arrest or even a detention. This was something else entirely. This was a lesson. I teach children how to resolve conflicts with words instead of fists. Denise continued. I teach them that every person deserves to be treated with dignity no matter what they look like or where they come from. I teach them that fear is natural, but it should never be an excuse for cruelty. She looked at each of the 4 officers one by one, making eye contact with every single one of them. If I cannot stand here tonight and practice what I preach, then everything I have ever taught those children is a lie. So I am choosing to see you as human beings. Officers who were given bad information and did the best they could with what they knew. I'm choosing not to be angry, even though I have every right to be. I am choosing to turn this moment into something meaningful. The young officer who had been holding her badge finally spoke. His voice was quieter now, almost humble. Ma'am, I'm sorry. This was a mistake. Denise nodded slowly. I know it was, and I forgive you. But I need you to carry this moment with you. The next time you respond to a call like this, I need you to remember my face. Remember my story. Remember that the person you are approaching might be someone just like me. Someone who has done nothing wrong. Someone who just wants to go home. She reached out and gently took her badge back from his hand. Can you do that for me? Can you remember? The officer swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, ma'am. I will remember. And across the street 12 phones kept recording, capturing every word, every gesture, every moment of a confrontation that had transformed into something no one expected, something that would soon change everything. The officers left slowly. One by one they returned to their vehicles. The young officer who had apologized was the last to go. He stood by his car door for a moment and looked back at Denise. There was something in his eyes that had not been there before. Something that looked like the beginning of change. Then the red and blue lights disappeared down the street and the neighborhood fell quiet again. Denise stood alone next to her car. Her hands were trembling now. The adrenaline that had kept her steady during those terrifying minutes was finally draining away. Her knees felt weak. Her chest felt tight. She leaned against the door of her Honda and tried to catch her breath. She had held it together. She had said what needed to be said. But now that it was over, the weight of everything came crashing down on her like a wave. The elderly neighbor from across the street was the first to reach her. She moved as fast as her bad hip would allow. Her arms wrapped around Denise in a tight embrace. Neither woman said anything for a long moment. They just held each other while the last light of day faded from the sky. Are you okay? The older woman finally asked. Her voice was shaky with emotion. I was so scared for you. I did not know what to do. I wanted to help, but I did not know how. Denise pulled back and managed a small smile. You helped by being here, by watching, by not looking away. Other neighbors began to approach now. The young couple from down the street. The family with the new baby, the retired teacher who lived on the corner. They gathered around Denise in a loose circle. Some offered hugs. Others just stood nearby with tears in their eyes. That was the bravest thing I have ever seen, the young husband said. He was still holding his phone, the one that had recorded everything. The way you talked to them. I could never have done that. Denise shook her head. It was not bravery. I was terrified. I have never been so scared in my entire life. but you did not show it." His wife added, "You were so calm, so strong." "How did you do that?" Denise thought about the question for a moment. She thought about all the years she had spent in classrooms and offices, all the angry parents she had faced, all the troubled students she had counseled, all the moments when she had to be the steady presence in the middle of chaos. "Practice, I suppose," she said quietly. 30 years of practice. The neighbors stayed with her for almost an hour. They did not want to leave her alone. Someone brought her a glass of water. Someone else offered to drive her car into her driveway so she would not have to get behind the wheel while she was still shaking. Finally, when she felt strong enough, she thanked everyone and walked the short distance to her front door. The house was dark inside. She had left that morning expecting to return to a normal evening. A quiet dinner. Maybe some television. A phone call with her son. Instead, she was returning as a different person. Changed by something she never could have predicted. She did not sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling while her mind replayed every second of what had happened. The flashing lights. The shouted commands. The feeling of hands searching her pockets for weapons she did not have. The fear in her chest that had been so intense she thought her heart might simply stop beating, but she also remembered the young officer's face when she finished speaking, the way his eyes had softened, the way his voice had changed when he apologized. She held on to that memory like a small flame in the darkness. Morning came slowly. Denise made herself a cup of coffee and sat at her kitchen table watching the sun rise through the window. She had not checked her phone since the night before. She had been too exhausted and too overwhelmed. When she finally picked it up, she saw that she had 47 missed calls, over 200 text messages, and her voicemail was completely full. She opened her social media and her breath caught in her throat. The video was everywhere. Her neighbor had posted the recording to his page late the night before. By the time Denise woke up, it had been shared over 50,000 times. The comment section was flooded with messages from strangers, people from all over the country, all over the world. This woman is incredible. I am crying watching this. She handled that with more grace than I ever could. This is what real strength looks like. Everyone needs to see this video. The major news networks had picked up the story. Her name was trending on social media. Reporters were already gathering outside her school. Her phone kept buzzing with calls from numbers she did not recognize. Denise sat very still and tried to process what was happening. 24 hours ago, she had been an ordinary woman living an ordinary life. Now she was at the center of a national conversation. She thought about ignoring all of it, turning off her phone, closing her curtains, waiting for the attention to pass. That would have been easier, safer, less complicated. But then she thought about her students, the young people she had spent her career teaching to use their voices, to stand up for what they believed in, to take difficult moments and transform them into opportunities for growth. This was her difficult moment, and she had a choice about what to do with it. She got dressed and drove to her school. The parking lot was full of news vans and cameras. Reporters rushed toward her car as soon as she pulled in. Microphones were pushed toward her face. Questions came from every direction. Mrs. Williams, how do you feel about what happened? Do you think the officers should be punished? Are you planning to take legal action? What message do you want to send to people watching? Denise held up her hand, and the crowd fell silent. She had been quieting rowdy classrooms for 3 decades. A group of eager reporters was nothing compared to 37th graders on a Friday afternoon. I will make a statement, she said calmly. Please give me a moment. The reporter stepped back. Cameras focused on her face. Recording lights blinked on. Denise took a deep breath and began to speak. Last night I was pulled over 3 blocks from my home. Officers pointed their weapons at me because I matched the description of a robbery suspect. I was terrified. I was humiliated. I was treated like a criminal even though I have never broken a law in my life. She paused and looked directly into the nearest camera. But I am not here today to call for punishment or revenge. I'm not here to say that those officers are bad people, because I do not believe they are. I believe they are human beings working within a system that sometimes fails. A system that teaches them to see threats before they see people. The reporters were silent. No one interrupted. No one asked a follow-up question. They just listened. The problem is not those 4 officers. Denise continued. The problem is that we have not taught each other how to see. We look at someone and we see a description, a category, a set of assumptions based on the color of their skin or the neighborhood they live in or the car they drive. We do not see the teacher who stayed late to help a struggling student. We do not see the mother who is rushing home to cook dinner for her children. We do not see the human being with a story and a family and dreams for the future. She felt the emotion rising in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. I am choosing to turn this moment into something meaningful. I'm announcing today that I will be working with our local police department to develop a new training program. A program that teaches officers to see the humanity in every person they encounter. I have already spoken with the chief of police this morning, and he has agreed to support this initiative. A murmur went through the crowd of reporters. This was not what anyone had expected. They had come looking for anger and accusations. Instead, they found something far more powerful. They found hope. And standing in that parking lot with cameras flashing and microphones recording, Denise Williams realized that the worst night of her life might just become the beginning of something extraordinary. 1 year later, Denise stood backstage at a convention center in Washington, D.C. She could hear the murmur of thousands of voices on the other side of the curtain. Police chiefs and community leaders from across the country had gathered for the national launch of the See Me initiative. The program she had started in her small Atlanta neighborhood had grown into something she never could have imagined. Her hands were sweating. After all this time, she still got nervous before speaking to large crowds. Some things never changed no matter how famous you became. A young man in a dark suit approached her. He was carrying a tablet and wearing a headset. One of the event coordinators, 5 minutes, Mrs. Williams, he said with a polite smile. Are you ready? Denise laughed softly. I have been a teacher for 30 years. I'm always ready to talk, but the truth was more complicated than that. The past 12 months had been the most challenging and rewarding of her entire life. Everything had changed so quickly. Sometimes she still woke up in the morning and forgot for a moment that she was no longer just a middle school principal from Atlanta. The video of that night on Maple Street had been viewed over 100 million times. It had been translated into dozens of languages. It had been shown in classrooms and police academies and corporate training sessions around the world. Her words had traveled further than she ever thought possible, but with that reach came responsibility and criticism and pressure that sometimes felt impossible to bear. Not everyone had praised her response that night. Some people thought she had been too soft on the officers. They wanted her to be angry, to demand firings and lawsuits and public apologies. When she chose forgiveness and partnership instead, they called her naive. They said she was letting the system off the hook. They accused her of caring more about being liked than about real change. Those comments hurt more than she ever admitted publicly. There were nights when she lay awake wondering if they were right, wondering if she had made the wrong choice, wondering if her message of compassion was really just another way of accepting injustice. But then she would think about the young officer who had apologized to her that night. His name was Chun, and over the past year he had become one of her closest partners in this work. He traveled with her to speaking engagements. He shared his own story of how that encounter had transformed his understanding of policing and bias. He had become living proof that people could change. If she had responded with rage that night, would he have changed? If she had screamed and cursed and demanded his badge, would he have become an advocate for reform? She did not think so. Anger might have felt satisfying in the moment, but it rarely opened hearts. It rarely changed minds. The curtain parted slightly and another coordinator peeked through. 2 minutes, Mrs. Williams. Denise nodded and straightened her jacket. She thought about all the people waiting in that auditorium. The police chiefs who had flown in from cities she had never visited. The community organizers who had spent years fighting for change. The young activists who saw her as either a hero or a sellout, depending on who you asked. She could not make everyone happy. She had learned that lesson painfully over the past year. All she could do was speak her truth and hope that it reached the people who needed to hear it. The curtain opened fully and she walked onto the stage. The applause was thunderous. Thousands of people rose to their feet. The sound washed over her like a wave, and for a moment she felt her eyes sting with tears. She reached the podium and looked out at the sea of faces, black and white and brown, young and old, uniforms and civilian clothes. All of them here because of something that started on a quiet street in Atlanta on a Tuesday evening. She waited for the applause to fade. Then she began to speak. 1 year ago tonight I was driving home from work. I was tired. I was thinking about my students and my son and what I might have for dinner. I was 3 blocks from my house when I saw the flashing lights behind me. The auditorium was completely silent. Every eye was fixed on her face. What happened next changed my life forever. But more importantly, it changed the way I think about change itself. She gripped the edges of the podium and leaned forward. Slightly, I used to believe that the world changed through protest and legislation and court decisions. I still believe those things matter. They matter enormously. But I have learned something else this year. I have learned that the world also changes one conversation at a time, one moment of connection at a time, one choice to see another person as fully human at a time. She paused to let the words settle. The officers who stopped me that night were not monsters. They were human beings who had been trained to see threats everywhere. They were scared. They were following protocols that had been designed without enough thought for the people on the other end of those protocols. They made a mistake that could have cost me my life. Her voice caught slightly. But she pushed through. But here is what I know for certain. Calling them monsters would not have fixed anything. Demanding their destruction would not have made my community safer. The only thing that had any chance of creating real change was reaching across that divide and saying, I see your humanity even in this terrible moment. Can you see mine? She looked toward the side of the stage where Officer Chun was standing. He gave her a small nod of encouragement. That young officer who apologized to me that night is here today. He has become one of my dearest friends and one of the most powerful voices for reform in his department. He did not change because someone punished him. He changed because someone saw him. The audience began to applaud again. Many of them were crying. Denise held up her hand for quiet. The CFMA initiative is now active in 47 cities across this country. We have trained over 10,000 officers in the past year. We have brought together police and communities for honest conversations that would have seemed impossible before. And we are just getting started. She smiled for the first time since taking the stage, but I want to be clear about something. This is not just about police. This is about all of us. Every single day we make choices about how we see each other. When we pass someone on the street, when we interact with a cashier or a bus driver or a neighbor, when we read about someone in the news who is different from us. In all of those moments we have a choice. Do we see a category or do we see a person? She stepped back from the podium and spread her arms wide. I am asking everyone in this room to make a commitment tonight. Tomorrow, when you go back to your cities and your jobs and your families, I want you to practice seeing. Really seeing. Look at the people around you and ask yourself what story they might be carrying, what pain they might be hiding, what dreams they might be nurturing, and then treat them accordingly. The applause started again, but she was not finished. My father was a police officer for 32 years. He passed away 6 months ago. She had to stop for a moment to collect herself. He did not live to see everything that has happened this year. But before he died, he told me something I will never forget. He said, Denise, you have done something I tried to do my whole career. You have shown people that the badge and the community do not have to be enemies. They can be partners. They can be family. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she did not wipe them away. I miss my father every single day. But I feel him with me in this work. I feel him with me right now on this stage. And I know that he would want me to tell you the same thing. I tell my students every single morning, when they walk through the doors of my school, she looked out at the thousands of faces watching. Her, waiting. I see you, she said softly. I see you. And that is where everything begins. The audience rose to their feet one more time. The applause seemed to shake the walls of the building. And standing at that podium with tears on her cheeks and hope in her heart, Denise Williams knew that the worst night of her life had somehow become the greatest gift she had ever received. Not because of the fame or the recognition or the invitations to speak at important events, but because it had given her the chance to prove something she had always believed, that one voice. Speaking truth with love could change the world, one person at a time, one moment at a time, one choice at a time, and that was exactly what she intended to keep doing. For as long as she had breath in her body, because the work was never finished. The work was just beginning, and she was ready.